Everybody, welcome to Storytime with the Fairy Doctor. I am Halo Quin and I am also the Fairy Doctor, and I'm trying a little experiment today. I am live over on YouTube and on Instagram. So if you see me looking between places, that's why. Just imagine that I have multiple people in the audience, and sometimes I'm catching your eye and sometimes I'm catching theirs. Welcome, welcome. So, I deal in unadulterated stories. No snake oil here, just pure magic and enchantment. For not that long ago, as we all know, our healers learned their magic from the fair folk themselves. And this medicine has been passed down to us over the years through story, through fairy tales. Not the kind of tale that you'd hang on the edge of your hat. No, the kind of tale that you tell, that you share with each other. And so I would like to share some of this medicine, this magic with you here today. I even have my doctor's bag full of stories, and rather than coming with a tale that I think would be helpful to you, instead, get that open, there we go, I invite you to settle into yourself and to conjure up in your own heart and mind what it is that is troubling you today, what it is that you are longing for, what it is that is weighing on your mind. For if you have come across this live stream, this video, then this medicine is for you. Hold that close, that longing, that trouble, that desire. Tell me what ails you, and I'll tell you a tale. For the Fairy Doctor is in. And I will choose, without looking, where is it? There it is, in my doctor's bag, and feel through for the story that calls to you. We have the 3 drops of wisdom. I don't know if you can see that on the just focus the camera. 3 drops of wisdom. So you can tell you saw me, I was not looking. This was chosen through synchronicity, through the calling of what you needed to hear today. And, well, the medicine of this tale, this is one of my favorite to tell. Drop me a comment, drop me a love if you have heard the story of Ceridwen and Taliesin. That magical journey of how the greatest bard that ever was came to be. Well, once upon a time, not too far from here, perhaps before time was time, perhaps, well, when the mountains had grown, for certain, there was, by the side of a lake, a woman, a witch, a mother. Ceridwen. She lived with her 2 children and her husband. And her 2 children, they was fair and smart and to be one of the most beautiful women in the area. And her son, who was, well, let's just say he wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. Let's just say that his looks were not going to win him any beauty pageants. And she worried for him. She worried for him that he didn't have anything to make his way through the world with. He didn't have smarts and he didn't have looks, so how was he going to make a life for himself? Thought and she thought and she thought and she mulled it over. What could she do for her son? How could she support her child? And she came up with a plan. What if, she thought, I could brew up a cauldron of inspiration? What if I could stir up a divine spark of magic? What if I could call in wisdom and gift it to him? That spark of magic, that delight of divine wonder, of enchantment, the poet's tongue, the magician's mind. Well, this seemed like the perfect plan. And so some say she had to go and ask the druids how this would be done. Others say she listened to the trees. And still others say she already knew the way to go in one of her magic books, or perhaps in her very magic bones. Whatever it was that taught her the way to stir the cauldron, she still had much work to do. And Ceridwen, well, she commissioned a great iron cauldron to be made and sat on the edge of the lake. She had a hut built over it to keep the flames that would burn beneath it from being doused. And, of course, to stop any extra rain getting in the open top of the cauldron itself. And then she knew what she must do. A year and a day of gathering flowers and herbs and all the ingredients at just the right time from just the right places. Well, this was going to take some doing. To keep the potion brewing, she was going to need some help. Someone to stir the pot and someone to tend the fire. And so she went walking across the land, through the trees, listening to their whispers in their leaves. And she asked the wind for help. Bring to me someone who can help me with this task. Bring to me someone who will do as I ask. And moments later, the wind rustled through, and Ceridwen, on the path through the trees, found herself face to face with an old blind man and a young boy. Morda and Gwion Bach. Little Gwion. Well, this was perfect, she thought. Do you two perhaps need some work? Somewhere to stay? Somewhere to sleep? Be fed? And the pair said yes, please, for they'd been walking a long time and they were tired of sleeping in the trees. Ceridwen took them to the cauldron by the side of the lake. Ceridwen took them in and showed them just what they needed to do. Morda stoked the fire, placed the logs on to warm it more, to keep it going, banked it in the evening so that it would stay simmering throughout the night. And little Gwion Bach, well, he stirred the pot. With a great big spoon, he stirred and stirred. On his tiptoes, he stirred and stirred. He stirred and stirred. And Ceridwen wasn't cruel. She said, of course, he could stop for lunch. And he and her son played, and he and her daughter played, but mostly Gwion stirred for a year and a day. And as he stirred, he got taller, and it got easier, until, well, a year and a day had passed, and Ceridwen had gone out, gathering just the right herbs at just the right places, just the right times, the flowers when they blossomed, the leaves before they fell, the roots when they were juicy, all that was needed to go into the pot. Just the right times and just the right places as Gwion stirred and stirred and stirred. A year and a day passed. The cauldron was filled to the brim. The potion was ready. Within it had been brewed divine inspiration, wisdom. Arwen. Within that great cauldron were 3 drops of magic. Ceridwen went to get her son. As she got to the house, and she gathered him up and brought him outside, Gwion was still stirring. And perhaps more to put an extra pitchy bit of pine on the fire at just that moment. Perhaps the flames had a mind of their own, and they rose up, licking round the side of the cauldron. Or perhaps it was just something unexpected deep in that pot that caused the potion to bubble up, a great big bulbous bubble on the surface that grew and grew and grew until it popped, and 3 drops landed on little Gwion's thumb. Ow! He sucked those drops from his thumb without thinking. Well, if he thought, he wouldn't have thought that it would be a problem, for it burned. It burned. But in that moment, quick as a flash, the Arwen snuck through, slipped through, sparked through him, and he knew what had happened. He knew that he had taken the magic meant for Ceridwen's son, and he knew that she would be furious. And what does any small boy do when he knows that he's in trouble? What does any child do when they know that Mama's coming? Well, little Gwion with those drops of magic Arwen, that divine inspiration coursing through him, turned tail and ran as fast as his little legs would carry him, away from Ceridwen, away from the witch who had planned out and brewed this potion, away from the place where he had stolen it from unintending, and straight past the mother herself, straight past Ceridwen herself. Little Gwion ran, and Ceridwen, who had had magic for longer than he'd been alive, knew what had happened. She left her son behind and gave chase after the thief that had stolen what was meant for him. She ran and ran, he ran and ran, as fast as his little legs would carry him. She ran as fast as her longer legs would carry her, and she began to gain on him. He could feel her getting closer and closer. What do I do? What do I do? He thought to himself. And quick as a flash, the Arwen sparked through him and inspired him. He shook from the tip of his nose to the tip of his toes, and he grew furry. His ears grew long, his feet grew huge, and he had a flash of a little white tail. He leapt across the fields, bounding as a hare, experiencing the world from the hare's view for the first time. And little Gwion back ran, but Ceridwen, who had had magic for longer than he'd been alive, knew just what to do. Quick as a flash, she changed too. Her ears grew pointy, her coat grew dark and furry and sleek, her tail long, her paws with claws sharp, and as a greyhound, a deerhound, a hound, she chased him faster and faster through the fields, the grains of wheat brushing against her face as she ran, as she gained, all hair running from her that had stolen the magic that was meant for her son. She got closer and closer until her sharp teeth nipped 3 tiny white hairs from the tip of his tail. What do I do? What do I do? Little Gwion jumped ahead for a moment, but quick as a flash, the Arwen sparked through him. The magic enlightened him, illuminated him, brought an idea. Up ahead, he suddenly knew there was a river. He could hear it, he could smell it, he could see it coming up, and he leapt into the air, his paws as a hare suddenly slicking back into fins, his tail growing vast and wide, his nose changing shape, his fur becoming scales as he dove into the water, a great silver salmon swimming upstream. Hard and fast he swam, hard and fast, following the Arwen, calling home. But Ceridwen, who had been weaving magic for longer than he'd been alive, well, she knew just what to do. Her paws became webbed as she lifted herself, leaped up from the ground and dove into the water, her snout becoming short, her teeth even sharper, her ears small against her head, and her tail strong. She hit the water as a great otter, strong and fast. She grew closer and closer. She gained on the salmon swimming upstream. She got closer and closer until her sharp teeth nipped 3 scales from the tip of his tail. What do I do? What do I do? Poor little Gwion did not know what to do. He was going to be caught and he was going to be eaten, and quick as a flash the Arwen coursed through him, sparking, inspiring a new way of being. He leapt, great fish that he was, from the water into the air, and as he leapt he twisted and curled and grew smaller and smaller until his tail was feathers and his fins were wings and his nose was a beak, and he was a tiny, tiny fluttering wren, the smallest of the birds, a wren fluttering high as fast as his wings could carry him, catching the wind, the thermals rising up from the land, and hiding in the clouds wherever he could, higher and higher as fast as he could fly, away, away, away. But Ceridwen, who had had magic for longer than he'd been alive, knew just what to do. As an otter she leapt from the water. She rose into the air, her feet webbed becoming wings and clawed, her mouth, nose, snout growing into a great hooked beak, her eyes sharp and clear, her fur, feathers, and on great lazy wings she swooped and soared and spiraled higher and higher, a hawk to catch the wren. Ceridwen rose on the rising thermals, a hawk to catch the wren. Ceridwen flew higher and higher. The wren hid in the clouds, but the hawk was sharp of sight and keen of knowing. She grew closer and closer as he fluttered and flew as fast as he could, and she knew how to ride the winds, for she had been doing this a long time now. Long before Guion had ever begun stirring the cauldron, long before her children had been born, she had been flying, she had been soaring. And she grew closer and closer. She got closer and closer. And little Guion, the tiny little wren, got more and more flustered, more and more fluttery, and he could feel her closer and closer until her great sharp beak plucked 3 tiny feathers from the tip of his tiny tail, leaving it almost bare. What do I do? What do I do? Quick as a flash, the Arwen, divine inspiration that it was, this magic flew through him as a hawk flies through the air after its prey. And he knew, in that moment, he knew just what to do. Beneath him the clouds parted, and he saw a farmyard covered in seed, in grains. And he tucked his beak under his wing, he tucked his wings under his body, he tucked his feet up close into his belly, and he began to tumble down, 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 the magic growing smaller, him growing smaller, tiny, tiny and golden, until he dropped and landed a seed amongst the grains of wheat. Ceridwen, the great hawk, chasing Guion, the little thief that stole from her son, landed on sharp claws in that farmyard amongst the grains. She scratched at the earth, and she shook from the tip of her beak to the tip of her tail, and her feathers grew black, and her beak grew short, and her wings changed shape. Somehow shorter, somehow stronger, somehow more as a hen. A great black hen she became, and she began to eat, pecking up every single seed. Every grain in that farmyard, every seed she saw, she swallowed down, every single one, until there was no more seed to be found. At that point, with her magic, she turned herself back into a woman and thought to herself, that thief will never trouble me or mine again. But such is the way of magic that has been weaving for longer than even Ceridwen had been alive, that the seed in her belly became a seed in her belly, and as the months passed, she realized that she was yet again with child. One she had not chosen, but one brimming with magic. She grew large, and 9 months later she gave birth to a beautiful baby. And she loved him. But her son, oh, her son, not the smartest, not the prettiest, by a long shot. Somehow he knew, even so, that that baby had stolen something meant to help him. And so Ceridwen knew she could not keep the child anywhere near her other son, her firstborn son. Looked daggers at the baby. So she enchanted a sealskin, waterproof and safe, and she wrapped the baby carefully inside. She placed it the small baby boy in a coracle, a round boat, and she took it to the river, where she set it off, flowing downstream, out to sea. Some time later, a prince was sat on a salmon weir, fishing for salmon. It was Beltane Eve, May Day Eve, the end of April, the beginning of spring, and it was said that someone who caught a salmon from that weir, well, on that day, their luck would be forever changed. So he was trying his luck, because up till that point it hadn't been great. And as he'd been fishing, throwing his nets and gathering them in, he had so far caught 3 crabs, 2 minnows, and a left boot with no laces. The sun was setting, and Prince Elfin threw out his net once more, one last time, gathered it in, and as he gathered it in, Elfin felt it had some weight to it. It really had some weight to it. There must be something in this net, something quite big. It felt like perhaps it could be a salmon, and he pulled it onto the shore, onto the weir, and found instead a small round boat with a seal skin parcel. Well, at least it wasn't a boot, he thought, and he unwrapped the parcel, and in a moment discovered inside was a small golden baby boy, shining with magic, shining with Arwen, with inspiration. And that baby boy, he stood up. Newborn though he was, as wobbly as his neck should have been, he stood up. There was magic here. Not only did he stand up, but Alvin, completely speechless, listened as the baby said, "Your luck has now changed. Take me home with you, raise me as your own, and I will be your bard. I will be the greatest bard that ever lived. And your luck, well, I will be of far more use to you than 100 salmon caught this day." And Prince Elvin could only say, "My, what a shining brow you have," which in the Old Welsh is Taliesin. And so Taliesin was named, shining brow, for the light of flew through him. And by the time he was only 10 or 11, he had gotten Elvin out of some pretty tricky scrapes. And by the time he was fully grown, it was true, he was known as the greatest bard alive. And that is how Taliesin was born. Once Gwyonbach stirring the cauldron for Ceridwen, who was brewing a potion for her son, who was stupid and ugly and needed some help. Now, we do not know the tales that tell of how her son got from then to when he was grown have been lost, or at least as far as I'm aware they have. But we find him again. His name was Morvran. Morvran, which means cormorant, the deep diving seabird. And we find him in the stories of King Arthur's court, fighting alongside the most beautiful of knights. And he was still ugly, so ugly and so dark that people thought they were an angel and a demon together. But he was also, when grown, known to be one of the wisest of the knights at Arthur's table. And so it just so goes to show that we all have our own path to wisdom. For some of us, it is stirring a year and a day in service. For others, learning how to integrate what we have learned ourselves. And sometimes the path is not clear, but it takes time either way. Thank you. Now, I like to take a moment here as the fairy doctor to pull some threads of magic from the story. And that was the tale of the birth of Taliesin, of Ceridwen and Taliesin, an old Welsh folk tale that has become legend, that has become myth, that has become, well, a contact point for many modern pagans and those beings that have become deities. For Ceridwen now is often known as a witch and a goddess and a mother. All three things still true. And Taliesin, well, the bard. But there's a fine line between the bard and a god of poets. These divine beings speak to us of that magic, of where we find inspiration, where we find divine wisdom. Throughout the ages, even the Christians credited Ceridwen, the witch, and her cauldron as being the source of divine inspiration, the gateway of divine inspiration into the world. For the Christian bards, she was the one who opened the way for Arwen, that divine light that came from God, that came from source, that came from the beyond into our world through her cauldron. And that story tells us, and here perhaps is some medicine for you. If you have come across this, then perhaps this is the medicine that you are looking for today, something to mull over, a gift from the fairy doctor. If you are seeking wisdom, it takes time. It takes patience. Sometimes the path that we walk upon, in order to learn how to see from other perspectives, to run as the hare, swim as the salmon, fly as the wren, sometimes it takes a path that we don't expect to lead us to where we are looking to go. Sometimes it takes acting in service and a thankless task where we do not know where it is headed. We do not think that it's for us. And sometimes, as for Morvran, we realize as we mature that we cannot gain wisdom by being handed it by someone else. We can't learn what we need to know just by reading books or listening to others, but instead we need to walk the path and find our place. As Morvran found his place in King Arthur's court, where he was appreciated and could use his skills, and even his fearsome face was appreciated and had a purpose, had value. And this is something that I think we can all remember. There are places for all of us. It just sometimes takes time to get there. I'm glad that resonates. Thank you. So yeah, my prescription for you, as you have entered into the doctor's office, you deserve a prescription. Well, this is it. If you find yourself toiling at a thankless task and you do not know the purpose of it, take a breath and say Awen 3 times to remind yourself that inspiration comes at unexpected moments. And we just need to keep going. And perhaps we'll realize that the work that we're doing, we'll discover that the work that we're doing will thank us in the end. With that, quick as a flash, divine spark of magic that lives in all things in the world, just waiting for us to feel its presence and take it in. Thank you for joining me today, my darlings. Thank you for watching if you're watching on a replay. If you have not already found the Enchanted Academy, I would like to invite you to join me there. I actually have classes in there, and there is a replay currently up on the power of the voice and using your voice, not just in storytelling, but magically in all kinds of ways. So you can join the Enchanted Academy and dive into that for free. And if you liked listening to the chase, if you liked hearing about the changing of shapes, there is also a class in there on the magic of shapeshifting, where you can learn some skills for the witch's power of shapeshifting. For as magic weavers, as storytellers, as people who love stories and love magic, those skills are open to us. So come and join me in the Enchanted Academy. You can find all the information about it at haloquin.net/T or in the description below when I have edited it. And I look forward to seeing you there. Next month, I've got some interesting things lined up for you. The replays are already up, so you can dive straight in and brush up your magical skills. Thank you for joining me in this experiment where I had 2 live streams going at once. So if you notice me looking between the 2 and missed the explanation, then that's why. I will look back on it and see how well this worked and decide whether or not I'm going to do it again. Thank you for your thanks. Many blessings to you that came, much magic and joy and delight. And I look forward to seeing you in the Enchanted Academy, where we work to re-enchant the world together. And now I need to find the end buttons.